The woman next door seems to believe she has control over the entire building, and then has the audacity to break into my apartment. I'm a 31-year-old woman living in a small apartment complex with 6 units. Just last month, the unit directly above mine was put on the market and sold almost immediately. The new owner moved in less than a week ago. This morning, as I was taking out the trash, I noticed a note stuck to my door. At first, I assumed it was a friendly introduction from a new neighbor, but boy, was I wrong. The note began with, "Dear tenant, I recently purchased the building and wanted to introduce myself. My name is blah blah," not going to include her actual name, "and I believe you'll find me to be a fair landlord. However, there are rules you must follow. Everyone is expected to be in their apartments by 9 p.m. If you plan to stay out later, you should consider other accommodations. No pets are allowed. If you have any, they must be removed before I conduct an inspection, or I will call animal control to take them away. This is your only warning. I will inspect the units monthly, and you must be present to answer any questions or face eviction. Late rent payments will also result in immediate eviction. If we all adhere to these rules, I'm sure we'll get along just fine. Sincerely, blah blah." What in the world did I just read? Here's a fun fact about my building. We all own our units. Nobody owns the entire building. I won't lie, I started to panic when I read the second rule, because I have cats, and there's no way I'm giving them up. But then I remembered that we bought our unit just before Christmas. We had been renting it from a friend, and when she mentioned she was thinking of selling, we jumped at the chance to buy it without even having to move. So, in some ways, it still feels like renting, even though we actually own it. Now, I'm not the type of person who's good at confrontations. I tend to get nervous and shaky. But I was furious, so I marched upstairs and knocked on her door. You know that gut feeling you get when something's about to go down? Yeah, I had that. When the door opened, there she was, a classic Karen, with hair even blonder than mine, and nails that were long and brightly painted. She didn't look pleased to see me either. I introduced myself and mentioned that I lived in the apartment below, hoping to discuss the note she had left. Before I could fully explain, she interrupted, insisting that her letter was just a set of basic rules that even a child could comprehend. If I wasn't happy with her guidelines, she suggested I could simply hand in a notice to vacate. Wow. At that moment, I couldn't help but wonder if people could really be that self-righteous, but my experience in retail had already answered that question long ago. Calmly, I informed her that I actually owned my unit. Unlike what she claimed, she hadn't bought the entire building, just her own unit, and therefore had no authority to enforce the rules she mentioned in her note. This revelation did not sit well with her. She started raising her voice, adamantly insisting that she had indeed purchased the entire building, and that failing to follow her rules would lead to my eviction. For a brief moment, I began to question myself when another neighbor opened his door. He stepped out and asked what was going on, politely requesting her to stop yelling since he worked night shifts and was trying to get some sleep. I explained to him that I was merely trying to clarify that she hadn't actually purchased the whole building, and she began yelling again. My neighbor, clearly fed up, told her to stop and then delivered the most satisfying line I had heard all day. "Are you stupid?" Her expression froze as he laid out the facts, explaining how mistaken she was and that, as a member of the building's homeowner association, he could confirm she had absolutely no right to impose rules on everyone. She glared at us both before slamming her door shut. I thanked him, and he remarked that in all his years living there, he had never encountered someone so entitled. Update. Here's a follow-up to my last post. A lot of people were curious if she did anything else, and as it turns out, she has. This situation is still ongoing, and my boyfriend, who's at home while I'm at work, is currently witnessing it and texting me updates. If you missed my previous post, here's the gist. A new neighbor moved into our building and left notes on everyone's doors claiming she had purchased the building and set out a list of absurd rules for us to follow. The truth is, she only owns a single unit or apartment in the building, not the entire property. Whether she's just delusional or plain foolish is still up for debate. She'd been quiet for the past few days, so I thought the ordeal might be over, but apparently I was wrong. In our building, each unit is assigned one parking space. Just one. I park in my designated spot while my boyfriend leaves his car on the street on the other side of our building. Our parking lot is tiny, with just 6 spots for residents and 1 for visitors. The visitor spot is almost always vacant, and my neighbors have mentioned that my boyfriend could use it since we're the only ones with 2 cars, but he doesn't mind parking where he is. This morning he woke up to the sound of shouting. Our kitchen window looks out onto the parking lot, so he took a peek and saw our entitled neighbor standing next to our friendly neighbor's car, yelling at him. She was insisting that she needed his parking spot for her second car and demanding that he move his vehicle immediately. My neighbor calmly repeated that it was his spot and suggested she park in the visitor's spot or on the street. He even warned her that if she had his car towed, he would report it as stolen. Undeterred, she kept yelling that she could park wherever she wanted and that he had no choice but to move. Concerned she might take his spot, my boyfriend moved his car into my empty space while I was at work. The last text I got from him said that she stormed upstairs and slammed her door in frustration. When I got home from work, I saw that she had indeed parked her second car in the visitor's spot, but she had done such a poor job that it was blocking the driveway. I ended up parking on the street, too exhausted to deal with the situation. Sorry for the delayed update, but as I mentioned, her car was still blocking the driveway the next morning. However, by the time I got home later that day, it was gone. My boyfriend told me that a tow truck had come and taken it away, though we're not sure which neighbor made the call. She's been unusually quiet since, except for the occasional sound of footsteps. Well, I'm back with more to share. As many of you predicted, her sense of entitlement only grew. For those who missed my previous update, her car was towed, though we still don't know which neighbor was responsible. This obviously infuriated her, but since I was at work, she hasn't directed any anger toward me or my boyfriend. It's been a rainy week, and since I don't have a dryer, I haven't been able to wash large items like sheets and towels, only clothes that I can hang inside to dry. Finally, on Saturday, the sun came out, so I rushed home from work, dragged my boyfriend out of bed, and started washing all the blankets and towels in case it rained again. I managed to get through 5 loads of laundry, hanging everything out on the communal clothesline we all share. There are technically 2 lines for us to use, and we've never had any issues before. After hanging up the last load, I went inside to relax for a bit. When I returned an hour later to bring in the first load, I found every single item I had hung out lying on the ground. Nothing had been hung in their place. Everything had been torn down, and both my clothespins and basket were missing. Much of the laundry I had hung up was still damp, now caked in dirt. I called my boyfriend, and together we brought everything inside. Then I headed upstairs and knocked on her door. When she answered, I asked if she had taken down my laundry, to which she smugly replied that I hadn't asked for her permission to use her line. She added that next time, if I asked nicely, she might consider letting me. Let me be straight with you. I work in retail, so I'm no stranger to dealing with difficult people. I'm used to keeping my cool in these situations, and I did my best to handle this whole issue, whether it was with the letter or the car. But my bed is my sanctuary, and when she messed with that, just to be spiteful, it crossed a line. I calmly informed her that the clothesline was for everyone in the building, and no one needed her permission to use it. She tried to interrupt me, but I simply raised my hand and told her I was on the building's committee, so I knew the rules. I suggested she stop acting like this. It wasn't helping her in any way. I wished her a nice day as she slammed the door in my face. Update 3. I really hoped my neighbor would settle down, but here we are. This story does have a somewhat satisfying ending, though. This just happened last night, and I'm still a bit groggy, so forgive any typos. For a while, our neighbor had been quiet, and my boyfriend and I thought maybe she'd finally realized she couldn't control the whole building. One of her cars was parked in her spot, and the other on the street behind my boyfriend's car. There were no more clothes torn off the line, and no more notes stuck to doors. But that changed yesterday. Since we live in the ground floor apartment, we have a side door that opens onto the shared yard. I only really use that door to air out the place, or to take a shortcut when hanging laundry. Anyway, yesterday as we were going about our day, we noticed the neighbor and a few others setting up tables and chairs in the yard. No big deal, it's shared space after all. But a few minutes later, there was a knock on the side door. My boyfriend opened it. It's a glass sliding door, so she could see us inside. We couldn't pretend we weren't home. After the usual pleasantries, she informed us that she was having a party, and asked us to move our wooden planters off our patio because she needed the space for her barbecue. Absolutely not. First of all, the patio is our private space, not shared. Secondly, the planters are right next to the glass door, and the last thing I want is some random person standing right there, peering into my living room while they're grilling all night. My boyfriend reminded her that she didn't own the building, so we wouldn't be moving anything. One of her friends, already setting up the barbecue in the yard, asked what she was up to. She huffed, turned on her heel, and walked away without a word. We figured that was the end of it, but we were mistaken. A few hours passed and we decided to close the curtains for some privacy. Whoever designed this place clearly didn't prioritize that. We could hear the typical sounds of a backyard gathering, chatter, laughter, and the sizzle of food on the grill. Then there was another knock at the door. I was busy cooking dinner, so my boyfriend went to answer it. This time, it was one of her friends saying she needed to use the bathroom. Apparently the entitled neighbor had suggested she knock on our door instead of going upstairs. My boyfriend, always polite, told her that she couldn't use ours. She apologized for the intrusion and left. But barely 2 minutes later, there was a loud banging on the door. By now, my boyfriend was getting fed up. When he opened the door, the entitled neighbor started berating him, questioning how he could expect her guest to go all the way upstairs. She demanded that he apologize and keep the door open for her guest to use our bathroom. Normally, my boyfriend is a calm and reasonable guy, but this time, he lost his cool. He told her to back off and stop bothering us, to get her head out of her ass, and reminded her that she couldn't just claim whatever she wanted. Our bathroom wasn't hers to share, and if she wanted her guests to use a bathroom, they could use hers. He warned her that if she knocked on our door again, he'd call the police for harassment. At this point, one of her friends came over, told the entitled neighbor to leave us alone, and apologized for the trouble before wishing us a good night. We expected the party to get louder and last all night, but surprisingly, it wrapped up around 1 a.m. The next morning I noticed that everything had been cleaned up from the yard, but our planters had been knocked over. Joke's on her though, because we hadn't planted anything in them yet, just used cat litter mixed with soil. I use potting mix as cat litter since it's cheaper, so now she gets to enjoy the lovely scent of my cat's old litter. Update 4. Well, I'm back. I thought maybe my neighbor had finally calmed down and we were done dealing with her nonsense. I still hear her arguing with the upstairs neighbor now and then, but nothing too serious. However, what happened this afternoon has me questioning how her mind works. In my previous posts, I explained how my new neighbor seems to believe she owns the entire building. Newsflash. She doesn't. Yet she's tried to enforce some ridiculous rules, none of which are legal. After a few heated discussions, I thought she had finally accepted that she didn't have control over everything. But I was wrong. Living on the ground floor, I have a glass sliding door that opens out into the shared yard. While I'm not thrilled about it, we mostly treat it like a window. Since it was a nice cool day, I had the door open, with the screen door shut and locked, to air out the house after some rain had left it smelling a bit musty. Whenever that door is left ajar, my cats immediately make a beeline for it, sitting vigilantly as they watch the birds fluttering outside. I was feeling pretty worn out, and my boyfriend suggested we take a nap while waiting for the laundry to finish. I agreed, thinking it was a good idea since the day had been quiet, so we headed to bed. About an hour later, we were jolted awake by a rattling noise coming from the living room. At first, I assumed one of the cats had attempted to climb the screen door again, so I got up to scold them. But when I reached the living room, I was shocked to find my entitled neighbor tugging aggressively at my screen door. She was yanking on it so hard that the entire frame was shaking. I asked her what on earth she was doing, and she nonchalantly replied that she had seen my cats through the door while she was out hanging clothes and wanted to pet them, but the door was stuck. I calmly explained that the door wasn't stuck. It was locked because this is my home, and she couldn't just walk in whenever she pleased. She persisted, continuing to yank at the door while shouting that I had no right to keep my cats from people who wanted to pet them, claiming it was her right to show them affection. I repeated that this was my private residence and she had no business trying to enter. My words seemed to infuriate her further. She began screaming at me, calling me a little bitch and accusing me of animal abuse, all while questioning how I dared to speak to her that way. At this point, I was thoroughly fed up with being berated in my own home. So, with the sweetest smile I could muster, I politely told her to fuck off. If looks could kill, I would have been a goner, leaving my cats to fend for themselves. She made one last attempt to open the door just as my boyfriend emerged from the bedroom, warning her that he'd call the police if she didn't stop. Finally, she released the door, shot us a furious glare, and stormed off. Needless to say, we're ordering another security camera for that door. And yes, my cats are microchipped. Edited, to add. Just to clarify, since it's come up in a few comments. My phone was charging in the bedroom, so I didn't have it on me when all this happened. Where we live, the police aren't exactly prompt unless something is happening right then and there, and I didn't want to turn my back on a person as unpredictable as her. My boyfriend only got up when he heard the shouting, initially thinking I was just talking to the cats. Update 5. For those who are new to this saga, here's a brief recap, or you can check my previous posts for more details. My entitled neighbor bought the unit above ours and seemed to think she owned the entire building. She tried to impose all sorts of ridiculous rules, parked in other people's designated spots, and even threatened to have our cars towed. She also accused me of abusing my cats simply because I wouldn't let her pet them and threw a fit when I refused to let her friends use our bathroom. It's been unusually quiet for the past few weeks. Normally, I can hear her bickering with another neighbor almost daily, but lately, there's been nothing. Last week I bought a new car, hooray. But since it's a bit larger than my old one, I've been hesitant to park it in my usual spot and have been leaving it on the street instead. The other day, when I got home from work, I noticed a young man standing on her balcony. He was quite friendly, greeted me, and introduced himself as her nephew. He explained that she had broken her foot during a family dinner after tripping over a dog, and that she was now staying with relatives because she couldn't manage the stairs. He mentioned that he was house-sitting for her because she didn't trust her neighbors, though he admitted that we all seemed really nice and quiet. Maybe she's just a bit paranoid. It took everything in me not to break into a little dance right there. Update 6. Well, she's back. I was really hoping she wouldn't return after breaking her foot, but last week we heard a door slam upstairs, and sure enough, her car was back in the driveway. I'm not sure if her nephew is still around or not. Anyway, a few days ago I tested positive for the much-dreaded virus, and have been doing the responsible thing by staying inside and quietly suffering. I'm fully vaccinated, so it's not too bad, though I could do without the headaches. My partner was away all day Saturday, picking up his new car, and didn't get home until late in the afternoon. He parked his car on the back lawn to give it a quick rinse after the drive. I was inside, watching through the sliding door, when I heard her balcony door fly open, and she started yelling at him to get off her lawn. He calmly told her that he was just finishing up, and asked her to stop yelling because I had COVID, and the noise wasn't helping with my migraines. Well, that was clearly the wrong thing to say. I heard her stomping down the stairs, and then she started banging on our door, screaming that I was diseased and needed to isolate somewhere else before she got sick. She even threatened to call the police if I didn't leave. Through the closed door, I reminded her, once again, that she couldn't force us out of our own home, which we own, and that I was staying inside as advised. I told her she was free to call the police, but they'd likely fine her for wasting their time. According to my partner, who was coming in after moving his car, she looked absolutely livid, but once she saw him, she turned and bolted back up the stairs. We haven't heard a peep from her since, nor have we had any visits from the police, so it seems like it was just an empty threat. I was so tempted to open the door and say, "Sharing is caring," but I resisted. Just to clarify, since a few people have asked, we can't have her evicted because she owns her home just like we own ours. And unfortunately, hiring a lawyer here in the States is expensive, even just for a consultation. When we bought our unit, the lawyers handling the transaction charged us for every little thing. They even messed up the paperwork by misspelling my name, then had the nerve to charge us extra to correct it. As far as I know, my neighbor upstairs consulted his lawyer about her, but they said there wasn't much that could be done. Update 7. I wish I could say I never had to write about this again, and that she had turned into a normal neighbor. Unfortunately, I was wrong. She had been so quiet for so long and her car was barely around, that I began to think she might have moved out. But last week, I got a stark reminder that she was still here. To set the scene, our building has a total of 8 units. I live on the ground floor, and the sweet elderly woman across the hall and I have this unspoken agreement. If one of us isn't home, the other signs for and takes in packages, so they don't sit unattended in the hallway. I was expecting a delivery and had a feeling it might arrive while I was at work, but I wasn't too worried. My kind old neighbor would surely pick it up and leave it with me when I got back. No big deal, right? Well, it turns out my neighbor had gone away for a few days, so with no one around, the package was left by my front door, but when I got home, it was nowhere to be found. Oh yes, dear reader, you guessed it. She had it. About 10 minutes after I walked through the door, I heard the all-too-familiar stomping on the stairs, followed by a loud knock. Long story short, my package had been delivered, and in her twisted sense of duty, she claimed she was trying to do something nice by holding onto it until I got home. However, she accidentally ripped it open and saw what was inside. And yes, it was sex toys. I'm all about self-care. Sue me. When I opened the door, she threw the package at me, calling me a disgusting pervert and saying I should move out before I infected the place. I calmly told her that opening someone else's mail is illegal, and buying those items isn't a crime, but I appreciated her effort in taking care of my delivery.